Hey there, welcome to episode 115 of the Cafe Genius Impresario's audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this on Friday, May 9th, 2025. It's about 3:36 in the afternoon. Today's topic, investment up ahead. Not exactly what you're thinking, but not too far off. If you're new to the Cafe Genius Impresario's audio program, you're probably curious, what is that name all about? Well, I'll tell you, Cafe Genius was started to facilitate the pitch workout room at Tech Alley many years ago. I think it was it 2022? I think it was. And so the name came from Cafe Centro, the place where startups start, a coffee shop in lovely San Francisco, actually in South Park, very near the then AT&T. Actually, I think it wasn't even AT&T. Anyway, near the AT&T, now the Oracle ballpark. Cafe Centro spelled with two F's, just like Cafe Genius. It's where companies like Twitter, Jack Dorsey used to hang out there with his laptop working on Twitter. Unfortunately, Cafe Centro is no longer in business, which is very sad and unfortunate. Genius, from the genius lunches that used to take place right here in Vegas during the downtown project days. It was a random kind of ad hoc gathering of people who were working on this, working on that, whoever, whatever. Go update, a little chit chat, see what's up, what's down. It was a good way to share ideas, get some status updates and so on. But very ad hoc, very, very casual. And finally, Impresarios, this audio program is about people doing interesting things. Ideally, we will have guests, including entrepreneurs, innovators, entrepreneurial innovators from our ecosystem and beyond. And so we have the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description. It contains the show notes, a summary which I'll read, and the episode links. Today, there are 4 shameless self-promotion links for your host, that's me, and 1 link to an article that is topical, but we will eventually cover more of this. Cover, I don't really like that word, but we'll talk about some of the other items that are brought up in this article. Don't worry, I'll get to it in a moment. So let's get started so we can get finished. It is Friday after all. The summary of today's episode: it is too early to decide what the near term looks like as a result of state law updates and plans for economic diversity and whatnot. But we can ponder these in the same context in which we have been examining our entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, starting now. The 4 links for your host, that's me. And if there are guests, by the way, they would have their links as well. So I label them as host and guest, if there is a guest. I've had guests before very early in the life of this audio program. They shall return someday. BuyMeACoffee.com/DanHugo has a profile page. I use it as a sort of a completely free-form link tree of sorts. There are links to all of my audio projects. There are links to my GitHub organizations. There are affiliate links to my favorite coffee beans, some biographical information and so on, and a link at the very top of the page to the weekly microcast, Buy Me an Update, available exclusively on buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts. A very brief, 5 minutes or less, rundown of the previous week's episodes, any news and announcements coming up. Next, Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/danhugo. The hyphen is the key next to the 0 on most keyboards. Some people call it a dash, but hey, it's Friday. This is similar, although I don't use it in quite the same way as Buy Me a Coffee. We do have a recently launched, not scheduled, not topically constrained program called Coffee Solo, KOFISOLO, Coffee Solo at ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/danhugo/posts. We can talk about whatever. The most recent post just went up early this morning, in fact. So those come whenever, and the topics are whatever, and we'll take it from there. Finally, the relevant link for today, hopefully you were able to sit through those others. Some gubernatorial inputs. Our Governor Lombardo participates in the was going to say the governing process, but I guess that's right there in his title. But part of the legislative process when the legislature is in session, as they are until June 2nd, I believe it is. So this is an article in the Nevada Independent about the bill with his name on it, I suppose. I don't know if they have it. They call it the Lombardo bill. Is that what they call it? Let me get the article right here. We're gonna step through that later. His long-awaited economic development proposal. He brings them forward this session. So one of them, SB 461. So Senate Bill 461. So there's some bullets that we can rip through real quickly. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not talking about this in super depth because the legislature is still in session. So we're going to see what they actually come up with. But I thought I would just step through this as part of a larger sort of introduction to what's going to come for the next 4 years. Why 4 years? Well, I'll tell you shortly. It's not what you're thinking. Or maybe it is. So let's get to it so we can get finished. Like I said, in case you may be listening to us to this on any day, but I am recording this on Friday afternoon. In fact, it should be earlier. Not necessarily capital investment in the title. What was the title again? Investment Up Ahead. When I titled this episode "Investment Up Ahead," it's right there. It's written right there. How could I let you down like that? When I titled this episode Investment Up Ahead, I was not thinking about access to capital, which is often the first choice of many if they are asked what they feel might be missing from the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem of the greater Vegas area. And this is actually, I think it's still true. I really haven't asked the question since the answer is always the same. We need access to capital. We need more capital. We got to have capital. Rather, I was thinking of the other types of investment from people, maybe government agencies and perhaps non-government organizations, and maybe from peers, neighbors, members of various communities. These could be financial or otherwise. In the case of bootstrapping, maybe some of this capital. But mostly this is about committing to a journey, supporting a journey or journeys, and maybe looking down the road at what an investment of some kind now will mean to the ecosystem and its participants in some near-term future. So the investment doesn't necessarily need to be capital, and in fact, let's consider the cases where it is not. I was actually inspired to ponder this during a discussion with one of our board members, Mary, over at the Innovate for Vegas Foundation earlier this week. When we were talking about the state of the innovation culture here in Vegas, she suggested that people not be showing up to ponder their own journeys, but many might not yet be invested themselves in that journey. In other words, the startup scene has arguably a lot of spectators in it. I agree. So the GoEd in the next 4 years is sort of the starting point today. That's the Governor's Office of Economic Development, GoEd. I think other states have this. I don't think this is not a Nevada thing, although I don't know if other states, I haven't looked, I should. Is there an Arizona GoEd? Is there a California GoEd? Let's just quickly call an audible here and see. Arizona GoEd. Maybe there isn't. California GoEd. Well, searching for that acronym. Oh, okay. There's not as many Google hits for GoEd, that abbreviation GOED, but there is a California Office of Economic Development, or there was. They look at innovation and entrepreneurship. Anyway, so I've already brought the show to a screaming halt. The governor's agenda, the legislative agenda, and of course the past two sessions. I'm sorry. I've totally jumped to the third bullet. My bad. Let me start over. The GoEd in the next 4 years. I'm not necessarily selecting 4 years along the term interval of the current Trump administration, rather along the session calendar of the state legislature, which has regular sessions every 2 years. They can have special sessions as well. We are presently in the final month of the 83rd regular session, ending on or about 2 June, started in February, with 2 more regular sessions over the next 4 years. So I figured, okay, so we'll take the current session, the one in 2 years, and another 2 years after that, and see what happens. Obviously, there will be, hopefully there will be an 87th session 2 years after that. An economic diversity agenda has been on the table since around 2011. Probably before, but I was flipping through a little bit of history. And again, today's episode is not a deep dive into the history of this, but I think that would be interesting. So we'll probably get there eventually. And there are various reports which appear over the years, really looking at high-paying jobs and opportunities beyond the fun economy, which has just received its trademark earlier this year in February, which of course became more urgent as the Strip turned into a ghost town during the pandemic lockdowns of 2020. So Southern Nevada could continue depending on a resilient tourism economy, of course, which came back quite strong as people sprinted from being locked down at home to living it up here in our oasis in the desert, or we could focus on developing additional sectors, which of course was already the case, but now the effort has stepped up a little bit because we don't want that to happen again. I mean, imagine if tourism were to take a dip this year, perhaps, who knows? Actually, there's already a little bit of controversy because at this time, so it's early May of 2025, there are already some headlines about the dip in tourism in Vegas because of concerns about the economy. Others, oh, it's Chicken Little. It's not. You're panicking for nothing. Everything's fine. So we'll see. We'll see how things go through the year, and we'll go from there. The governor's agenda, the legislative agenda. Hey, that sounds familiar. And of course, the past two sessions. This session and the next two will be interesting to look at to see what realizations were made during and after the pandemic, where they steered from that point to the present. And let's be honest, what did they actually do and what was actually done and what actually happened and what the plans are in the near term. And then, of course, what sorts of corrective actions are taken to steer in a positive and sustainable direction in the next 4 years. Maybe call it five. A 5-year plan is common. So by 2030, what will have been decided? That'll be convenient because the pandemic of 2020 essentially removed the calendar year, technically starting in March, but removed the year from the timeline, effectively setting everything back 1 year. But if we look from 2020 to 2030, and if we stick with my 10-year plan, as I always describe it, when I say 10-year plan, I mean it's going to take at least 10 years to go from one, if we want to stick with the ecology paradigm, one climax community to another. So fun economy to anything resembling a tech economy, for example, at least 10 years. I often refer to, and in fact, I've done entire episodes on this, at least one specifically, on how the Phoenix area, basically Arizona, the Arizona economy, but especially the central Arizona economy in the Phoenix, Maricopa County area, added an entire new sector, the biotech sector, in about 2005. Started. They built some buildings, and they had TGen, translational genomics, and Genentech coming to the area. And so as they were building those buildings, they were introducing educational curriculum in the Maricopa County Community College system to offer vocational training for lab technicians and so on. And the state university system in Northern Arizona, very close to Nevada, Northern Arizona, Central Arizona, so Northern Arizona University, Arizona State University, and Southern Tucson with U of A, University of Arizona. U of A already had a medical school, but they added more specific programs for advanced training in biotechnology and genetics and so on. So they added a new component to their already established economy, which we'll touch on in a moment. And that took at least 10 years. And today, these are completely legitimate. No, they're real parts of the economy. And that just doesn't happen overnight. You don't just simply post a headline on LinkedIn that says, hey, we're adding genetics to our economy. Takes a little bit of effort then after that. So, and then it'll be interesting to see what sort of corrections they do through that 10 years to stay on course. I don't know. Well, let's just say it's 2025. 2020, the year was spent locked down, so it's hard to say how that year counts, although certainly that was a learning year. And then the 2 sessions that followed. So what have they done? What have they done for us lately? What sorts of thinking has gone into this, and where is that bringing everything? So that's my, call me cynical, but we'll see. So the Lombardo bill, let's walk through the highlights as I pointed out in the Independence article. So we got that right here. SB 461 is one of 5 policy bills that Lombardo will be bringing forward this session. So the quick summary here, give up to $12 million in tax credits to child care facilities and offer abatements to business related to clean energy, advanced manufacturing, and defense as the state tries to move away from its heavy dependence on tourism. Now, as I like to say, the fun economy, recently trademarked, is not actually going anywhere. That's the plan, I think. So let's add a bunch of stuff and keep the fun economy. But they don't want to have the fun economy be so important. So there'll be state funds and so on, and you can read the article. In fact, you should. I liked it about Independence. Good, pretty good. I mean, I read several news sources here, as should you, in wherever you live. It's the first time Lombardo has used one of his 5 bills to focus on economic development. I just bumped into the microphone, sorry. Although the abatements have been a larger part of Lombardo's platform. We have to figure out ways that we can compete, and so we do that through incentives. So that's the first thing I'm a little bit concerned about, is that they're providing incentives to come here and be a part of the establishment of foundational infrastructure and culture and people to enable these things. So incentives to begin this development, which will take a while. I would argue that there has only been some of the development of these foundational elements over the past, say 4 years, 2021 to 2025. There had been some prior. I don't know that the the development of an innovation district in the city of Las Vegas, and more recently, so that was I think it was 2017, certainly 2018, they established the innovation district in downtown Las Vegas. I think if we take a really hard look at that, it hasn't really become a bustling research hub. And now there's an additional effort to create yet another innovation district in the south part of the general Vegas, greater Vegas area. More buildings, more stuff. So we'll see if we build it, will they come? But let's go through the bullets real quick. So building child care facilities. Child care is important. During the pandemic, we learned from homeschooling that a lot of people who work, who have jobs, basically were using school as an alternative to daycare. That's not horrible, but it caused some difficulties when people that work were also locked down. So they were staying home. So now they're home with their kids. The homeschooling situation was a little bit chaotic. And nobody knew quite what to do. Well, my kids are supposed to be at school. They're supposed to be somewhere else, and I'm supposed to be at work. So it kind of upset the apple cart, as they say. So targeted tax credits for for child care facilities to help working families, but also support businesses in building a stronger, more inclusive workforce. So that will be nice if that happens. We'll see. Abatements for high-tech businesses. The bill would carve out tax abatements to clean energy businesses, aerospace or defense technology companies, healthcare technology groups, and manufacturing organizations, such as those related to electric batteries. I don't know what other kinds of batteries they would be pondering, but the electric kind here, and robotics. There's deductions, there's credits. Okay. Now, I don't know if you remember this. In 2023, there was a giant tax credit, $330 million tax breaks that were given to Tesla, or that were proposed to Tesla. I think that was the mega factory up in Reno. That ultimately failed, and you can read about that. There's a link for more information. But the idea was to just hand over a bunch of incentives. And where does that money come from? Where do those incentives come from? Well, I'll give you one guess, but usually it rhymes with education. Infrastructure funding, the measure. The measure establishes a program to help fund infrastructure projects and rural initiatives. Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulties here with some ridiculous chaos upstairs. That was actually the topic of the coffee solo episode this morning. So, hopefully you're not hearing a bunch of banging and booming. Infrastructure is important. It's a question that I've been asking for quite some time now. Infrastructure is not just fiber optic cable and roadways and so on, but infrastructure funding to eliminate infrastructure barriers ranging from wastewater treatment facilities to utility projects and rural areas with a critical housing need. So infrastructure is the physical plant, as we can say sometimes. It's the stuff that the government really is responsible for. And so, we'll see where that goes. No diversity plans. That's obviously politically motivated lately. It's the present climate. But he wants to focus on a workforce development bill, which will be interesting. We'll see. And this sort of dovetails, in fact, the diversity of focal areas dovetails off of, or vice versa, the SB 220 bill, the other movie bill, which will aim to put some money behind some other economic diversity plans, including aerospace and robots and other such things, in addition to media company incentives and so on. So establishing resources for like studio space and so on, which I believe is already happening either way, maybe. I don't know if it's funded itself. But the tech park, the UNLV tech park, the Harry S. What's his name? Harry Reid. I think it's Harry S. Reid. Tech park, which is where Blackfire Innovation and other resources are located presently. And there will be a studio space there. There's another bill in the assembly that is, I believe, having a hearing today, in fact, that would provide incentives to studios and whatnot for the facilities they're constructing in Summerlin. So 2 separate bills, one a little bit more diverse in the Senate, one focused more on specific incentive programs for studios, movie studios, to bring some business and jobs to the greater Vegas area. So we'll see what happens there. But this Lombardo's bill here does seem to intersect with those. Economic diversity, but not people diversity. Building a talent pipeline, this kind of goes to what I've been saying. It takes 10 years to develop or to add something to a community, an economic community. So this bill will incentivize industry professionals, hey, that's maybe you and me, to pursue part-time teaching in career and technical education. Now, I have to be honest, this is interesting, but not sufficient. Stipends to employers for the purpose of reimbursing employees for the time they spend teaching. This is interesting. Again, it connects the workforce, the existing workforce, especially in these particular areas, with the educational program. I would again suggest that they participate in the 7th grade time frame and forward, right? Obviously, they will focus more on high school students. Probably they'll view it as like an apprenticeship program for high school juniors and seniors, perhaps. But I think this is short-sighted, but we'll see. I'm just guessing. That's pure speculation on my part. Under the bill, school districts would be required to form talent pipeline agreements with local businesses to support internships and apprenticeships. I don't have high confidence in an implementation of this program out the gate, but if they do establish this, it'll be interesting to see if there's evolution in the way they implement it here. As we know, or as you hopefully know, the Southern Nevada School the Clark County School District, but Southern Nevada education doesn't always fare well in comparative surveys with other states and regions. So there's work to be done there either way. And new energy sources. This bill would also authorize partial abatements to businesses who work with biofuels, biomass, or other fuels from recycled materials. And okay, that's very nice. Sustainable energy, not a bad idea. So that's the Lombardo bill in a very high-level summary from a newspaper article. The interesting thing will be whether the parts of this that get support will actually fit into whatever else gets through. So I referred to the movie bills, for example. We're going to end up with are we going to end up with a functioning system in the next 4 years that I've referred to? Or are we going to end up with a disjoint mishmash that really requires the fun economy to be front and center? I predict the latter, but I'm always cynical. By the way, I do not necessarily have a problem with that. The fun economy is the fun economy. It has been what the Greater Vegas area has focused on for the last several decades. I'll say they've focused on it for 100 years. The very first, real casinos were built in the 50s, I think it was. I've talked about some of the history. By the way, I've recently, in mid-February, I finally visited the Mob Museum, so that was interesting. Why do we have a Mob Museum? Because that was a part of the the development of the economy here. So the fun economy should not be viewed as something that must be replaced, but I'm absolutely not against supplementing with other possibilities. Although I do think production by street, if you can hear that emergency vehicle, I do wonder if there's enough integration with the fun economy to uplift it at the same time that alternatives in a diverse economy are developed. So if there's, for example, I've talked about this previously, and I have a startup effort in this direction. If there are services that connect a tech sector or an innovation focus in general with the fun economy, so that the fun economy is within a smart city, for example, with innovation on display, city as a showcase episode, you can hear that discussion between me, myself, and I previously. So yeah, I'm not against developing these things. I don't want to sound like I'm a Luddite or something. Absolutely focus on these things, but not at the expense of the economy that's already here. And more importantly, the people that enable that economy that's already here. We've talked about this previously with regard to Silicon Valley specifically, Austin specifically, but just in general, pricing people out has consequences. So I'm concerned that some of the economic diversity plans putting this substantial element of the economy of Southern Nevada at risk, either through straight gentrification or maybe more subtle priority changes that slowly diminish either tourism, the employees that enable tourism, or both. So since I wrote it down, I thought I'd at least share that, but I kind of restated some of that. I know the two so-called movie bills will be an example of how these interactions could work. Maybe not. The Senate bill is more broad so far, with various programs that appear to fit into Lombardo's agenda for this particular bill, while the Assembly bill is much more focused on actual studios, bringing actual operations to the area with some presumed jobs and revenue streams, and whatever else. I think the Senate bill might be more interesting. If only one gets through the process, I think the Senate bill would, in fact, be more impactful. And I believe that the studio in Summerlin is going to be built either way. So then the question is whether they can just develop the tax incentive programs for the next session, see where they go. The tax incentives for studios is something that Mark Wahlberg has been focused on. So 2 years ago, he was strongly advocating for it. He relocated to Vegas with his family, has been an advocate for the Hollywood 2.0 notion. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. And we'll see what happens over the next 4 years at least. But what about the rest of us? I don't know about you. I'm not a movie studio. Not yet. And so one of the many things that bothers me about how Southern Nevada is going about this pursuit of economic diversity is the sending of mixed messages regarding startups and larger companies. Let's face it, the LVGEA, the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance, is a public-private entity that essentially drives the direction of the economy in Southern Nevada. LVGEA and others are gushing whenever big names and big money are looking at the greater Vegas area. If Google is thinking about adding more of their Googleness to the greater Vegas area, LVGEA is all about it. But they still talk about the ecosystem and developing a startup scene that leans into tech. They really want tech and startups and exits. Not that these are incompatible. The problem is, as we used to say back east, talking out of both sides of their mouths is something to be aware of. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Going all in on becoming the next Silicon Valley is a mistake. Enabling is fine. Enabling a tech scene, if you like. These are elements of a functioning and viable entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. So adding the infrastructure, developing a talent pool. If you say we're going to be the next Silicon Valley, that kind of picks the direction ahead of time. And if there is one thing that innovators are good at, it's at innovating regardless of what you think. So if we develop a strong entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, and more importantly, the talent pool that resides within it, we don't have to worry about selecting whether we're going to be the next Silicon Valley. The people doing the innovating will speak loudly. So enabling this is fine, but it takes more than just some politics and tax breaks to create Silicon Valley, as we know. Well, it takes a lot more, as we have talked about in previous episodes. Vegas as the next Vegas, for example. You can listen to that episode. I think it's 85. I already talked about the manufacturing sector, that some interesting things could happen in the area of manufacturing. And that was the Made in Vegas episode. And I have mentioned Utah and Silicon Slopes, Phoenix, and the presence of actual silicon fabs for decades in this region. If we're pondering another Silicon Valley, I argued that Arizona is probably a better candidate. And speaking of Phoenix, their addition of bioengineers to their established semiconductors, electronics assembly, and government contracting pillars, and those were actual pillars that they were really focused on back in 2005 when the genetic possibilities began to develop. So they established this new pillar, but had focused on the existing pillars. In fact, fun fact, they sent a delegation around doing some research. Some people in the greater Vegas area have done something similar. So here they sent people, I think one person really, when you get right down to it, to Silicon Valley and maybe some other places. But really, I mean, if you're going to be the next Silicon Valley, you basically look at Silicon Valley and say, we can do this. We can be this version of Silicon Valley. So if you looked at Silicon Valley after 2008, you saw a certain version. But you have to remember that that's a result of Silicon Valley from the dot-com era, the boom, and then the bust, and then the decline thanks to the Great Recession of the 2008 timeframe. But you really have to look at the Silicon Valley that developed from the 70s, when actual chip manufacturing was taking place at the likes of Intel and Fairchild, and Shockley Semiconductor had moved there long before that. You can look at the development of Silicon Valley from a post-war era, 1944, when Professor Frederick Terman famously relocated back to the Bay Area after being a radar engineer, a highly regarded radar engineer during the war, and drove a lot of development of Silicon Valley, often referred to as the father of Silicon Valley. But then you really have to look back well beyond, or well before, I suppose, well before World War II, back when the gold rush was taking place, and Leland Stanford was selling picks and shovels to gold miners, saving up some money to create a college named for his son, Leland Stanford Jr. Did you know that? I didn't know that. So yeah, the culture of innovation in the Silicon Valley area has been developing for decades, maybe even over a century. Training a workforce. The real transition is a move from employee-focused education to entrepreneurial innovator education. I've totally skipped over one sentence here, so let me restart this bullet point. My apologies. Establishing the talent pipeline is an interesting idea. This is a reference to the Lombardo Bill, but as I have mentioned very specifically, this is a decade of transition, at least. If you start with 7th graders, which I believe is the best place to start, I mean, you can start entrepreneurial indoctrination at any age. I know my first entrepreneurial endeavor was back when I was in 6th grade. So yeah, 6th grade, no, 5th grade, sorry, 5th grade, what a time. Miss Cairns, Miss Delfgaw, our team teachers, very weird classroom setting. But anyway, yeah, I started my first business with a classmate also named Dan. So we called it D&D Associates. But the move from, and this was even recent, there has been a high focus from the Clark County School District on training employees to work in the economy of today. And there is some pushback from the general population here on creating new opportunities within the infrastructure of education to lean more towards lean more towards entrepreneurialism and away from employment. So we'll see. We'll see if that gets buy-in. So the training a workforce, but also enabling real participation in the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem and cultivating that culture of innovation throughout would be interesting if they can make this happen. And that's why I'm going to see what happens over the next 4 years. I will tell you it hasn't happened over the previous 4. Let me repeat myself again. This doesn't happen with free lunch once a month, with some state laws and funding programs and incentives, or with big companies establishing a presence in the region to risk gentrification, the existing workforce, and maybe the fun economy itself. If you price people out by moving in big companies, and by the way, if they bring their employees with them, they may not find the talent pool they're looking for. So as they bring people in from, say, Silicon Valley, those people need to live somewhere, and they can purchase homes in Nevada for cash. We talked about Austin. The same thing could happen here. Austin was another episode. You can, if you're flipping through previous episodes of this audio program, you'll find it. Maybe even listen to it already. But Austin, keep Austin weird was their slogan. It's amazing what happens when you move in a bunch of tech companies. You jack the prices up of everything. You make the people that are keeping Austin weird need to move to lower cost of living regions and use public transit to get into the Austin where they worked. And that didn't work as well. So the tenor of Austin has changed, and that's a fact. Investment then. We need investment. No, not capital, though yes, capital. We do need capital, but everybody does. But we're talking about people pulling the trigger and being a part of the critical mass and the cultivation of the innovation culture, all topics I've talked about even recently. That is, if this is important, and it is, the question is cultivation generally good, or must there be this fantastic goal of somehow overtaking Silicon Valley as the global innovation hub out there? This is one of the claims we see here and there from the city, county, maybe even the state. We especially see this around Formula One, for example, when the races have been here for 2 years, around November. And when the Super Bowl was here, generally speaking, there will be a lot of showcasing and grandstanding and of course, glad handing. Like, oh, welcome to Vegas. Look at all of the distraction we will provide for your employees. I always find that interesting. Hey, we have a lot of entertainment. Yeah, but we want to come here to work. We want to develop our business, not develop your tourism industry. I'm being cynical, sorry. And, in addition to more vertical events that are not entertaining, the Mobile World Congress LV and CES and other such events. And I will remind you, if I've mentioned this previously, back contemporaneously in January, Consumer Electronics Show has Eureka Park, which is focused very specifically on startups and innovation. There's regional participation. There was zero that I could find Southern Nevada presence at Eureka Park. This is where you would showcase startups, showcase your innovation ecosystem, your actual innovators. I was disappointed. This is going to sound mean, but if you know me and you know that I'm just calling it as I see it, we need to have more ideas turning into action. And we see far too many of these same people showing up and telling their stories without anything coming of it. No, I am not suggesting that nobody is executing. There are people doing things. The people who are almost certainly doing these things have no time to show up for free lunches and glad handing. What goes on in the real ecosystem, the second startup scene where people are executing and not just talking about doing it, is the real, the thing we should be paying attention to, perhaps. So yeah, pull the trigger, whatever it is, and let us construct a second startup scene around actual startup action, and not only in the tech sector, maybe lean into the aerospace and defense stuff and the robots, and these are all tech, of course, but if there is a functioning move into media production, manufacturing, energy, continued water conservation, and so on, we can stop overemphasizing this silly and enable entrepreneurial innovation. And we enable it by shining light on it, talking about it, making sure people are aware of it, making sure people are not simply celebrating a good story. A good story is important. A good story and telling that story are important things, but there has to be something behind that. My closing remarks. This is sort of a preview ahead of whatever legislation shakes out, and this session ends in June. When the session ends in June, then we can revisit. And like I said, we should look at what was starting back in 2018. I've mentioned previously, especially in the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program, the Smart City Forward document that was published in around 2018 that looked at what it would take to make a smarter smart city. And this many years later, so 7 years later, there are a lot of boxes checked. They've done a lot of the things that were on the list. And I would wonder, if you wander the streets of Vegas and ask who thinks this is a smart city, you might get a quizzical look. In the meantime, we can look at whether there is any interest in deep dives into this stuff. I don't know that there is. I'm still looking at whether Initiative 2025 makes sense here in Vegas. Spoiler alert, it isn't looking good. Maybe if the Greater Vegas area could accomplish some fraction of the Silicon Slopes infrastructure in Utah, which I've commented on previously, there could be something, but we'll have to see what goes on here. A lot of solipsism and not a lot of infrastructure is dedicated to communication, recognition, and celebration of these efforts. And I've talked about, when we were talking about Vegas as a better Vegas, in Silicon Valley, this is the sort of stuff that would make front page news. The San Jose Mercury was essentially startup review. Here in Vegas, there's no such recognition or celebration in the media, which is a shame. And in fact, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority will pay influencers, those are people that post content on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and so on, to talk about the tourism aspects, the eating, the drinking, the socializing, the events, the venues, and so on. So the fun economy gets a lot of attention. What about that startup scene? Okay, back to work. I myself am executing, but demos speak volumes, and the time is definitely coming when I need to put up or shut up. Well, I'm not going to shut up, but you know what I mean. And that's it. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Cafe Genius Impresario's audio program. Don't forget that we can have guests, and hopefully we will again someday. We had a few good interviews back in the early days, but it turns out getting people in and around the Greater Vegas area to book a sitting and a discussion is something of a challenge. People here do definitely want to talk about their various favorite programs and whatnot, but they really go for their friends. It's hard to say, but we'll hopefully participate more in shining a light on the various stories that are going on here in the Greater Vegas area and maybe a little bit beyond. And this all sort of dovetails off of my own startup effort in the information awareness area that's working with the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, of which I am the managing director, to develop some community-centric information awareness tools in the open source arena and then deploying it here in Vegas to see what happens. So on that note, I will leave you. Have a good weekend if you're listening to this on a Friday. Have a good weekend no matter what, actually, whenever that weekend comes. Take care. Bye-bye.